Okay, well, I'm going to do an introduction. Dr. Scott Tinker is the state geologist of Texas, the director of the Bureau of Economic Geology, and a professor holding the all-day endowed chair at the University of Texas at Austin. He has served as president of the American Geosciences Institute and the Association of American State Geologists, and is a fellow of the Geological Society of America. Scott was a Collegiate Peaks Forum lecturer in January of 2013 when the film Switch was released. This film has been screened in over 50 countries by more than 15 million viewers and on thousands of K-12 and college campuses. Dr. Tinker founded the nonprofit Switch Energy Alliance, dedicated to inspiring an energy-educated future. Scott is also the voice of Earth Date, a weekly radio program featured on over 350 NPR stations in all 50 states and on the web at earthdate.org. His latest film, Switch On, addresses global energy poverty and energy transitions. The forum is pleased to have Scott back with us for this Switch On Q&A session. My name is Butch Butler, and I will be joined by Kelly Collins to moderate tonight's event. Please ask your questions via Zoom's chat function, and Kelly and I will then read the questions for everyone to hear. So Kelly, the first question, please.
Well, the only question I see so far is from Susan Matthews, who says, Vince is on another meeting tonight. So I don't have any other questions that have come in, but okay, I could ask one.
I see a question from Nancy Best. She says, I'm wondering how 45 pounds of scrap wood from a small furniture manufacturer could cost over $200. I'm so glad that woman doesn't have to pay that anymore. I'm assuming the electricity she'll have to buy will be much cheaper. Does Scott know how much that is?
Yeah, no, it wasn't that much. That was close to an annualized cost. So I think, if I remember right, she was looking at kind of $5 to $10 per basket, and she did that a couple times a month. So still a lot relative to her income. Her name was Sana Kanchi, and she was a wonderful person to get to know. She's very small, probably 4'8". I don't know if you could tell in the film, and her 5 kids. Sana Kanchi's 36, and she has 5 children. One actually has a child of her own, so Sana Kanchi's a grandmother. Not unusual in countries and economies and places in the world where it's poor. The birth rates are really high. Kids die, as we saw in Arawaco as well. So the electricity will be less than that. And there's actually electricity nearby. So Ahmad was going to try to truly help her get hooked up now that she has something to use it for. Just didn't have anything to plug in. So we're hoping that's happened, but we've actually asked Ahmad, the guy who was my host there throughout the Nepal, to speak to our teacher advisory council at the end of June. We're making a classroom for all the AP Environmental Sciences course across the country, across the United States. Big deal. 6,000 teachers teach it, 200,000 kids a year take it. And Switch is trying to provide the videos and supplemental materials for that. So Ahmad will speak to that group, and look forward to following up with him because he and his research team are in that community, in that rural area a lot. We can find out what's going on and follow up a little bit.
Great. She also asks, how much cheaper is the illegal electricity in Kenya as opposed to the safe legal hookups? It must be a great deal cheaper in order for people to risk their lives for it.
Well, it's a little bit cheaper. The cartel is not dumb, just a little bit cheaper. But we actually have, I want to tell you before I fit, and then I'll answer that. We actually are making episodes of Switch On because there's so many segments of the film where when you're cutting it down and making it into something that's reasonable to watch, the whole story doesn't get told. So I think we have made 4 or 5 30 to 40 minute episodes, one in Kibra there, outside of Nairobi, to tell that story more fully. I went back and interviewed the head of security at at Kenya Power and that afternoon, and we did a lot. And so we'll put that together. We'll do a longer look at what it took to bring first solar to the Arwako village there in Gunchukwa, because it wasn't quite as smooth as we showed. One day, torrential rains, and none of the holes in the aluminum frames fit, and we're drilling new holes. And, Sarah Jane was there. It was quite the adventure. We've got a longer one on Vietnam to show you a little bit there. And quite a bit of what we filmed in Vietnam wasn't in this film. We're going to put that in our next film, Making the Switch. Longer one on I believe, on Ethiopia. That whole story of the dam, really remarkable. So episodes will be on the website, and you can get more. It's really, and it's high production quality still. Really cool stuff. So, what was the question?
Is the illegal electricity cheaper than the legal?
Okay. I was kidding. I do that to myself all the time, but it is a little bit cheaper. That said, it's, as you heard when we were in the home, which really was about a third of the size of the office that you see that I'm in right now, my home office. You couldn't get a feel, but we were literally turning. I'd have to move out of the way for the camera to shoot up there. It was tiny, and they didn't want it. They don't like being subjected to cartel control, but that's the only way to get electricity. Once those illegal taps are made, that's it. And so they charge them money, and you pay. The way that works when you're using the token system, and a token could be an electronic token on a cell phone, you pay for a certain amount. I buy an hour of electricity and or a certain amount, and when that runs out, I have to not have electricity or buy some more. So it kind of establishes a credit system and begins to get some level of appreciation for not wasting it. We could use that here. But they don't have an option when the cartel comes in and taps around. That's their only source of electricity, so they pay the cartel. And a really interesting story about who the cartel was in that case. And my guide there was us, pay us. We installed it and we took it down, and now we might put it back up if we get paid again by Kenya Power. And so I think the part of all of that was coming through there, and you didn't see it in a few other places, one of the biggest inhibitors to access to energy, energy poverty, solving it, is corruption. And you see it at all levels: high-level government corruption, mid-range corporate corruption, community corruption. At all levels you see it. And corruption exists everywhere in the world, but it's very prevalent here because there's no systems of control. You can vote people out, or the people in power, are usually men, so call them strong men that are in power, don't even necessarily want to see the growth of the communities to get access to the energy and the things that it provides, like lights in your home to read at night and get educated, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It tends to create some form of democracy that oftentimes removes those kinds of leaders. And it's so it's a pretty tricky space. But I think our goal is to expose all that and shine a light on it and get the awareness higher so that we can all begin to act on it. And it affects so many other things. I mean, we showed the cooking and the lighting and the home, the clothing, the things, basic needs. But quickly you go to education, and then to healthcare. And then beyond that, big issues that the world faces in impoverished areas. So access to energy underpins healthy economies, and the rights and freedom of women. We showed Sanukanchi, and we didn't feature women going for water in Africa, but we showed the benefits of a solar pump and agriculture. It's the women who are disadvantaged and often not even always able to go to school. So there's that aspect of energy equality that starts to come up on a gender basis. You see directly tied to fertility rates is education. It's just a tight correlation. Higher education, lower fertility rates. And migration, immigration, again, from severely impoverished areas that are held by corrupt governments. People don't have hope. And after centuries or even sometimes millennia of families, they're leaving to try to find some place that they can have a chance. And so energy and healthy economies start to provide some of that. And those are world issues. And that affects everyone in the world. Rich people like us, I presume if you're on Zoom, I'm going to call you rich, because relatively you are, and all the way down. So that's why this topic and hopefully this film is so important. And before I do another one, just they're not not a lot here, but how did you like it? I mean, how did you find the film? Was it things you knew already, you didn't know? Did it tell a good story? Did you feel comfortable with our facts and that we were being objective and nonpartisan, important things to us? And so, you don't have to necessarily answer on, but I'd love to see it in the chat. We'll capture that. Just what your thoughts were about the film. It really matters to us.
While we're waiting for the chat answers to that, I have a couple of questions that have come in. Janet asks, in Ethiopia, the residents were paying 1 month of their yearly salary toward the construction of the dam. How did they get them to do that? And is it mandatory for every resident?
Yeah, isn't that remarkable? And Ethiopia has been one of the poorest countries in the world. If you look at it on a per capita basis, and even in the aggregate, 100 million people live in Ethiopia. So that's just under a third of the United States, a much smaller area. Originally, they didn't get them to do it. In fact, the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, wasn't that popular initially, a big government project. And again, corruption, it was not competitively bid. It's a multi-billion-dollar project, and it was sole sourced to an Italian dam builder. And, so who knows what was going on there, but you can guess. But it wasn't that popular. And then Egypt gets involved in Cairo because it's on the Blue Nile River, which flows north through Sudan and merges with the White Nile and becomes the Nile into Egypt. And Egypt said, hey, that's our river by colonial law. The Nile is ours. We benefit from the seasonal floods, everything. If you ever flown over Egypt at night, and I did coming back, and I woke up at 3 in the morning, I saw this white isthmus of light sitting there, and I wondered, what is that? Where are we? And I was kind of drowsy, because it looked like lights in a black ocean. And it's the Nile River, as I woke up, that has, heavy industrialization and lights across it, and in day, a little green strip. And then everything else around it is black. So it looked like a thumb of light sticking out into some ocean, but it was land, light at night on the Nile. And Egypt says, look, that's ours. They threatened to bomb the dam. That was first diplomacy. We're going to blow it up. And all of a sudden, the Ethiopians said, no, you're not. This is our project. And there was a lot of national pride that kicked in. And that's when the government, who was trying to self-fund this for the most part, there's been some other funding, but for the most part, Ethiopia is trying to self-fund this project. It's behind schedule and over budget, but they're getting there. And that's when they asked and then essentially required 1 month. Now it's a bond. So in theory, it'll be paid back. How? With revenue in part from sales of electricity to neighboring countries. It has changed the balance of power in North Africa. Energy, changed the balance of power, just the conversation around that. So initially that facility, which is massive. I mean, it's hard, even in the film, you probably got a sense of it, but 3 times the capacity of our Hoover Dam, just to give you a feel for it, if you've been out on the Colorado and seen the big dams. 16 400 megawatt turbines, each like the one we showed. So that will provide enough electricity for half of Ethiopia, 50 million people in one facility. Now, as demand grows, it'll become a lower proportion, of course, but 50 million people from one facility. So you say, okay, that's environmental damage from the flooding. It is. Disruption of sediment flows and movement of people. It was. On the other hand, that's 6 nuclear reactors with equivalent capacity factors, 10 major coal power plants, or 10,000 wind turbines. 10,000 wind turbines with capacity factor, or that one dam. And we have about 13 or 14,000 turbines in Texas, all of Texas. And if you've ever driven across West Texas, you know what that looks like. So yeah, it's infrastructure. It's big, but once it's filled, pretty steady, always on, no emission electricity. So nothing is perfect. There's no good or bad, clean or dirty. This is just an option that they have chosen to move forward at scale. And it's pretty remarkable when you see that all going on.
Okay, I'll go ahead and read the next question. It comes from Susan Matthews, and she's saying, Scott, could you speak about the inspiration to do this type of a film?
Yeah, I mean, I could quip. But I'll tell you, let's play it straight. Harry Lynch is the filmmaker. I'm the pretty face, he's the brains behind all these things. And he and I made the first film Switch. So that turned out, it remains quite popular. We've gotten 50 countries and millions of viewers. It's in universities and high schools all over the world. So lots of languages, etc. Harry went off as a filmmaker and made another big series on mental health. And then I was blathering on about energy and doing my thing, and realized as I was going more and more, there's this in Switch where energy was the star, 11 countries, site visits, interviews, the whole deal. We left off this big chunk of the world. People that don't have any energy or little energy, the emerging economies, etc. I got back with Harry about 4 years ago and said, look, we just have to tell the other piece of this story, at least when we're talking about energy. And we got a third film we're working on, but the other piece, and he agreed. And then I formed the Switch Energy Alliance. It's a 501c3 to begin to do this. And we're doing a lot of other cool things I'll talk about if you want to hear about them and have time. But so Harry and I agreed that this needed to be done. And that was kind of where it came from. We were pretty early on in the energy poverty, energy access conversation. This was 4 years ago. It's a very prevalent conversation now, and it should be. So that's what inspired us, is to start to tell that story of energy in the rest of the world. And when you start to think about the conversations going on in the world on energy, there's a lot of loud voices coming from US and Western Europe, 500 million of us. And even within that, it's a pretty smaller sector of loud voices, but kind of one perspective. Then there's these 7 billion other people in the world, and a lot of them have energy. It's not dire straits. They've got pretty stable, secure energy, not always on, but mostly. And then you start to move through that. It's not a we or they, us and them. It is a continuum of further and further lack of access on all the way down to 0, a billion people with no electricity, etc. So that group of people in the world, from 1 billion up to 7 billion, have a very different take on energy and what it does for them in a positive way. And you saw that a little bit in Vietnam. They were laughing. We've always had electricity, but there was dams, and now we need more, or we're competing with China to make your stuff. That's where all the stuff in the world is being made, and they need electricity. So they're going to build coal power plants. They're not going to cut down the jungle and put up solar panels or wind turbines, and they've built all their hydro. They're not going to put in nuclear reactors, so they're going to do coal. Really, the only other option would be some geothermal potential there, I think, some southern solar, and then natural gas. If you could get LNG facilities coming into those same ports, then you'd have a much different fuel, cleaner fuel, SOx, NOx, mercury, all that ash and particulates, and lower CO2 emissions. So, this is options for Vietnam, which we're working to talk about. So that inspired us really to get out and shine a light on that story, because I don't think that what we're talking about here, this clean, dirty, good, bad conversation that your kids are learning in school, I promise you, I've seen the curriculum, is healthy, because it's wrong. There actually isn't clean and dirty and good and bad. There's no form of energy that's clean. Yes, lower emissions, if that's the only metric for clean, and certainly fossil fuels have plenty of environmental impacts, from coal the oil, less natural gas, but some there too. And on nuclear has challenges, but boy, when you start talking about building wind turbines at scale to really try to ramp up and meet, or solar panels, and then all the chemical electric batteries to back those up, the amount of mining, the amount of manufacturing, and the landfill disposal for all of that. And it's numbers nobody's putting out in print much yet. It's huge. And so there's nature impact on one, there's atmospheric on one, local air on one, water. And those are the pillars, right? Land, local air, water, and the atmosphere, the pillars of the environment. And we've got to look to minimize impacts on all of those. And if we just do one, the others are going to suffer fairly mightily in some places, in some cases. So that's what inspired us. It's trying to get good information, nonpartisan, objective, and we have these peer-reviewed, and we banter back and forth politically and all of it to try to remove all of my biases and tell a reasonable story. So that's what inspired us, because I've got 4 kids from 30 down to 19, and I've been lucky to be in 65 countries in the world, and I can promise you the worst environments in the world, without exception, is where it's poor. They simply can't afford to invest in cleaning up the soil and the water and the local air. You don't drink the water. I have slides from Kieber that you'll make your stomach turn from the garbage piled in and the water that's being used. And it's where it's poor. So you have to have energy and the economy and the environment. These talk together. You can't remove the economy from this conversation of a clean environment. You can't do it. So the policies that are out there saying get rid of all these forms of energy and it'll just be a clean environment are naive, and they're disingenuous. It'll work the other way, and the data are in on that. It actually, the cleanest air in the world is where it's wealthy, even though we use the most energy. Look at maps. You don't have to take my word for it. Where do you drink the water? From the tap, where it's wealthy. Where the soil is cleaned up and clean, where they have regulatory regimes and it's wealthy. So this is what the rest of the world, those 7 billion people are wanting to come into, and they will, and they should. Okay, and that will change a lot of the things that we do. So that's the inspiration for it. Long answer, but it's a big undertaking, several years worth of effort and money and time, and so I'm not seeing how you liked it, but I hope you have, and appreciate the story that we're trying to tell.
So we do have some comments come in about how people enjoyed it. Susan Matthews said, we really enjoyed the film. Christine Whittington said, the part about the dung for cooking, not so much. Nancy Best said, I really liked the movie. I knew a good bit already, but it gave me a lot more information. Your answers right now are very helpful. I'm going to your website for additional stories.
Oh, awesome.
And then a clarification from Christine. She says, seriously, conquering distaste for the good of all, similar to insects as a food source that will benefit all of us. But some of us will initially react negatively. That would be me. How does one overcome this? The section about using dung for fuel in Nepal, to clarify. We have another question from Janet, who says, this is sort of an observation / question. At the beginning of the film, in the village where you were installing electricity, you said several times that you don't do more than they ask for. Mm-hmm. How do they know what to ask for if they've never seen it? Do they have an idea of how their lives would be different if they had electricity in their homes as well as the town center?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, you picked up on that, which is interesting. Waco indigenous people, about 90,000, live around their Sierra Nevada, a mountain range in the northeastmost part of Colombia, right on the Venezuelan border. And so they do get into towns. They weave, the purses that you saw that we were carrying, and a few other things that they sell, coffee beans, etc. So they know what electricity looks like and what it's like to have it. my son Derek and I and one other couple went up. We're invited to 4 in the morning, wander up a hill with the village people one morning in the dark, and then to a little clearing, hardly a clearing, complete canopy, small fire, about 70 villagers and us on mats around this fire, where for several hours they explained their concept of global sustainability to us through double translation. It was a very meaningful time, but what they communicated is they know the world is encroaching on them. They were moved into those mountains by the Spanish 500 years ago, and they've lived that way. Arawak lived that way since, the same way, same traditions and lifestyles. But they know the world is encroaching, and that without some modernization, they'll get overcome. So the first steps were a light bulb or two in each of the mud hut thatch roof buildings, a kitchen, a small room, a community center, a little store, etc. And then ceiling fans, 3 fans in the community center, and then 1 big refrigerator freezer in the store. That's what they asked for. They weren't ready yet for lighting in the homes, and it's all agrarian, so they live up in the mountains quite far away. It'd be pretty tough to get it there. You'd have to do individual panels, and it's fairly jungle-like, so not even that easy to do if they wanted to. But that's what they asked for, and they had legitimate concerns, but I think you saw their faces at the end of that 8-day period. Just having a light in the village square there and some air moving in the building was something quite special. And we had some moral issues ourselves. Is this going to be good or bad, or whatever that means? But you have to go with, they have to define it, and you go with it. And that's true. I go to a little parable, teach to fish or give fish. And it feels good to give fish, but I'm not sure it's very lasting. So learning, having the communities say what we want and what we plan to do with it is the only way to create those mini markets and micro markets that will be fit for purpose for them, and then grow into something at a pace that the community can accept. So you saw the woman in Nepal selling electric cook stoves. You saw in Kibra, in the slum, lights in the streets at night, so the shops could be open safely for kids to walk around, and et cetera, all these little micro markets that we didn't try to overstate, just show you that we're forming as a result of them deciding what to do with their energy as they got it. And that's a very powerful thing. So I think at the end of the day, and Sarah Jane can speak to this too, I think we all felt pretty good about what we'd done there, and that they wanted it and they would maintain it. They committed to replace that battery stack in 10 to 15 years, which is, my wife and I bought it. That was our donation at $15,000, US dollars. And that's not cheap. So you got to put away $1,000, $1,500 a year. They're doing that by selling popsicles out of the freezer and a few other things. But, I think they'll do it, and probably others will help, or we will if I'm still around to do that at the right time. But it's a good observation. How do you know? You don't know. But nobody is that isolated. The Maasai village that we visited, it wasn't a village, the home we visited where the giraffe walked by in Kenya, that was a little ranchette. And the Maasai have lived that way forever as well. Now you saw the radio and you saw a machete. The woman, guess what the first thing people get when they get electricity almost every time? Cell phone. And you're going, whatever. No, that's exactly what they get. And they start to communicate and see the world, talk to the world, open up access, and begin to understand what it is that the rest of the world is about, and the kinds of things that they could do. And this is important. As we think about, and you might have heard me speak. If not, I show a map of the world's income levels. And between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, 20 north, 20 south latitudes, it's really hot around the equator. And there's a lot of poverty, more than anywhere else in the world by a lot. And so climate change affects that. Adding another 2 degrees C on already 30 degrees C is going to affect that negatively, but not but. And what would affect it positively would be energy. You know, come down right now to Houston, Texas. It's 98 degrees and the air conditioners are cranking, and it's energy. You know, it makes your environment livable. Try Stockholm, Sweden in the winter. You know, per capita, the Swedes consume as much electricity as anybody on the planet to light the lights in the dark winters and heat their homes. So it's a luxury that we all are completely used to, and the rest of the world is just coming into it. Boy, that was a short answer for what inspired us. Oh, God. Shut this guy up.
So we have another comment on the film, which is Rebecca said, I loved the personal feel and sincerity of the movie. It was very clear you were there to help, and the people's suspicions of your motives were addressed honestly and ethically.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, and then we have another question from Stephen Whittington, who asked if there were communities that want to be electricity free. Have you encountered any?
Well, there are plenty that are electricity free, and not free electricity, but no electricity. I interpret that. I mean, there are plenty in the world that are. Whether they want to be that way or not, I don't know. Most of the ones that I've seen and visited would prefer not to be that way because it's severe poverty. You know, energy poverty is very tightly correlated to economic poverty. And you can see it in Cape Town, South Africa, driving from the airport to the main town, big slums and signs on the freeway saying, don't get out of your car. And you know, Rio de Janeiro, the favelas on the hillside, there are lights on, but severe energy poverty. And we call that under the grid. So it's right there, but you can't afford much. In rural and indigenous places, you know, where you don't even have a chance to have electricity. And by the way, Texas was that way not that long ago. In less than 100 years, Lyndon Baines Johnson convinced, you know, when he was a junior congressman, convinced Harry Truman to bring electricity to Texas by showing him what it would do. And so you don't have to go back that far to look at a life without it. And when you go to the Arhuaco and see that, you probably caught this, half the kids don't make it to adulthood. And you're going, well, why is that? Well, it used to be that way here too. Dysentery, rampant, tooth infections, things that we would go to the dentist for. That infection kills kids, okay? And so the question, do you want your kids to die? No. Do you want to have 8 kids so that 4 will live to adulthood? No. You know, will energy help you get educated and be more efficient and do things with a similar or better lifestyle without all of that physical labor and suffering? Yeah. And will it change your culture? Mm-hmm. Always for the good? No. I mean, the Arhuaco culture is wonderful. You know, we sat there after 8 days, and we didn't have electricity either while we were doing all this, except for our battery charged drills, you know, but not at night or anything. And so you could get pretty used to it. We went to bed when the sun went down. We got up when the rooster started honking and got pretty used to that lifestyle. And then we all commented about it. And then we all commented that when we came back quickly, it would all go away. So that lifestyle has a lot of advantages. So how do you blend those together? And so what's the mutual learning there? But I tell you, when I don't really buy into when I hear they don't want it or they, et cetera. The suffering is very real. Malnutrition, lack of vaccines, education, just big things, limited food choices and food quality, polluted water. It's not a good thing. And I appreciate the prior comment too about the ethical. We would go mostly like a week to 10 days. So it wasn't like I was immersed for months. I'm not going to pretend to understand everything at all. And Harry is a brilliant guy and does a lot of deep research. And our whole team, I think Sophie Distribution might be on the call as well here tonight. And it's a big team effort, small team, big effort. But so we don't pretend to know, but we kind of try to immerse as much as we can and bring as many different perspectives to it as we can. The comment was made about the biomass and the biogas. It's real. And these are some of the higher end people in Nepal. Again, Nepal, a very poor country. But man, you could see this kind of movement in Nepal means yes. There's just different signals that people have. And you could see her. She was one of our best characters. And off we went. And nobody knew I was going to pick up a pile of dung. I didn't know I'd pick up a pile of dung, but it seemed like the thing to do at the time because I try everything. You saw I was drinking crap and eating food and whatever. So, let's immerse. And she smiled and off we went. But they were so happy to have that biogas system in their home. I mean, you could see the difference on the wall, the smoke on the walls, the turn it on, turn it off, instant heat. Once you've spent the money for the system, no cost, zero cost for that fuel. So I find it hard to fathom. I don't know how many of you have natural gas in your homes to cook with, but it's a lot more efficient than electricity. And I wouldn't bring my charcoal grill inside. So let's just say that any form of biomass, but I can turn on that heat, boom, it's on and it's off. There's CO2, but there's no other pollutants. Nobody I know has died from cooking indoors with natural gas. That's a pretty big reach, but yet we have people taking off the connectors in California, disconnecting methane or propane from cooking inside because it's a fossil fuel. And so are we going to do that? Are we going to go to the world and say you can't cook inside? You got to use biomass or nothing, or electricity, which is clean, or nothing? I mean, where does electricity come from? There's just so much that is lost in the conversation from the loudest voices today that I think is stories we have to all tell so that the world can do intelligent things.
I have my own question, and it's going to push you a little bit out of your film. And I wondered if in the ribbon around the world that you were focusing on, did you notice a correlation between energy poverty and water poverty?
Yeah, it doesn't put me too far out because at the Bureau of Economic Geology, my day job, we have huge hydro research groups and are focused on a lot of these same communities. In fact, we're just starting a consortium, a corporate industrial consortium on energy and water poverty. It's called EWP. We're just getting it going. Bridget Scanlon is working on the water aspects and Ning Lin on the economics, and Michael Young and I are on some things. So they're a very strong correlation. And it's not a lack of water in most ways. It's a lack of clean water. So you get very sick, even when you're used to it. You push people, just dump garbage into the water systems, and it's heavily polluted. No energy to clean it up like we have. And then access to it in some places. The water sits under a lot of Africa, but you can't drill those wells and pump it out. So you're walking to the dirty rivers a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles each way. So that's water poverty. And I think, again, access to simple pumps. And so as we showed in Kenya with Farmer John, some solar pump systems or other forms of electricity, it doesn't have to be solar, can change that a lot, can access groundwater and begin to provide a much better form of agriculture, of cooking, and one of the big, probably the most important commodity to humans on the planet. You can't live without water. You can live without energy, but, well, not calories, but the kind we're talking about. But it's hard to. You can't live without water. So there's a real strong correlation there. And again, when you go to the poor countries in the world, I don't drink the water out of the tap. In most countries in the world, it's not clean. It's, you get used to it locally out of the system, but not for me. And I have a decent stomach. So that's just really, those are really tightly related.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen any others come up, so I will ask another one. So I'm really interested in the biogas systems. Are there contractors that come in and say, we'll build in Nepal, we'll build you a biogas system? Or do the folks figure out how to do it from looking at the neighbors? How does that happen, the design and construction of the biogas systems?
Sure, it's a new industry there. So we didn't feature it. We had it in the longer cut of the film, but the guy, when we went from the smaller biogas system to the larger one that they were constructing, the guy that's running that operation is actually the son of the woman's home that had the smaller one. And that's how we got that connection. So there's a little industry around which there are crews that build those biogas systems. And that's new. It's new to them. And they're not cheap. That takes quite a bit of the income depending on what level you are. But then if you think about free fuel for the rest of your life from your own animal and human waste, not bad. It can pay out in some amount of time depending on how big your reactor is and how much you're using. So it's an industry. I suppose the design came from somewhere else once they first saw it. But again, people aren't disconnected from the world. They just don't have the same kind of economy and access to the kinds of modern things that we do. The homes are nice on the inside, even though it's quite poor. There are just no wires in the walls and no plumbing in the walls. So it's kind of cinder block or nice wood in most of those places. But that's slowly starting to change. You saw when we went in and brought the cylinder gas into that house, I go, this is the house? I mean, I'm looking at this house going, how can this not have plumbing? But it didn't. Very nice home, 2-story. But there's nothing in it other than walls. And then that cylinder that we rolled in and cooking. And she used to cook with wood in her house. And the impacts of that are hard to fathom. I mean, that was a pretty tough scene in the film when we would go from Sanakanchi to this Sita Memorial Hospital, which is mostly for women and children. And you didn't see the waiting room full of babies that we had been sitting in, ready to go into the doctor's office with the one infant. And we were doing a 2-camera shoot in there. It's pretty tight. I thought the cameras, we usually do 2 angles on the primary people. I didn't know one was on me. But it was a tough scene, just watching these kids die needlessly. 3 million a year. And you saw Sanakanchi's hand shaking. There's a lot of derivative diseases related to breathing that much smoke your whole life, not just cancer. She has cataracts that are forming and other things. It's just wrong, So every time I hear somebody protesting natural gas in a home, I just want to think, you need to watch Switch On because that's just not right. Okay.
So I know that the real Butch Butler had some questions about coal in Vietnam.
Yeah, hey Scott. So yeah, I was really struck by the Vietnam part of it and the coal and and it's obviously the people there. This is their economy. They get electricity from it, but the technology that they're using isn't, and you already kind of said this, it's not what we would be using in the US today. I mean, it's pretty dirty. Um, the coal itself, what is it, a good quality coal?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really high quality coals. You know, it's not the lignite we have in Texas, dirt. Um, no, it's high quality. Anthracites and bituminous, they're nice coals. You saw me pick up that piece and break it. It actually cut my hand, and pretty decent cut. I was bleeding, wrapped it up for the film, but it really hard coal. And so they're in a wonderful seam there, and a lot of heat quality, heat value. So, and then they bring it around, and I completely agree though. And China too. China has scrubbers for ash. They have SOx and NOx scrubbers on most of the more modern plants, not the old ones. Mercury scrubbers. Nothing fit for CO2 at this point, CCS, but they often don't run any of those things because, as you all know, you bolt on another unit to scrub something out. That takes energy. That energy comes from more coal. So, and it's more expensive. So you're using more coal, more expensive, and they say, well, it's cheaper to do this. Let's just do this. And they don't run a lot of that stuff all the time. In Vietnam, a lot of the plants are newer. They're very proud of them. And so they have the bag house for some of the ash, but it didn't capture very much of it. And you saw the pile of ash I was standing on. I tried not to just faint, but I mean, good God, I went and I stood right before that shot. I went to stand on a little bit of a topographic high to get a better angle, and I sunk way past my knee, just voomp into the ash. And so we wanted to do those sort of person on the street things. If you go look close, there's a bottle of bourbon on the table, and it had a brand on it, but we actually took quite a bit of time and called it Tiger or something or other. We actually digitally masked all that because, we didn't want people to think everybody was just drinking. But that community, just like Pittsburgh used to be, there are plenty of coal towns in the United States that put up with a lot because other things were coming that were good, and so there's this trade-off. Nothing's perfectly good, perfectly bad. And that's true for coal. It's affordable, it's available, it's reliable, it's dirty. So they were trading the dirty for the other things that were the benefits to them. And Germany's done it, the UK did it, the United States did it. We're coming off that now, but you got to get to a certain wealth point before you start to transition your fuels, and they're going through that. It'd be good to help them accelerate through that. But, I think that's just the trade-off they're making. We filmed, it's not in this film, it'll be in Making the Switch. We went into a garment factory and spent a day there, and it was absolutely remarkable. 300 sewing machines all going at once, a whole lineup of people with irons. And then this, you do cuffs, you do collars, you do buttons all day long. And you have a 15-minute break and then a lunch and then a 15-minute break. It's the production line, and they make 100 name brands for the world. I literally take one off the shelf that the guy who runs the whole place gives me and change my shirt. And they're all name brands. Everything we wear comes from that factory or places like it. And that's why they're so cheap. And it's a great job in the community. They have daycare. They have some health insurance. They do get the breaks. At lunchtime, they turn all the lights off, and literally people are sleeping on or under their desks, taking a nap. We've filmed all this. And then putting out the products that we all demand. So the next time you think that your solution for zero emissions in whatever state you're in or company you run is, hey, you make it. Guess what? There's one atmosphere, and that's not a solution. And that's Many of the developed world, that's our solution right now. I'm going to buy credits, name your favorite company that's claiming to be zero emissions. They're just buying credits from who? Okay, those only go so far. Can't sell them more than once. There's only one atmosphere. So as we export all of our manufacturing to other countries, which we have done, they're making the electricity with coal. So let's get a little more rigor to this zero emissions conversation and try to find some energy honesty and talk about our single atmosphere when we're talking about climate change. And I would request that of all the candidates running for president and everybody else. You know, what's it really look like? And that, well, that'll be making the switch. We're going to hit some of that. And it'll be, you know, it's not going to be the most popular thing to say probably, but that's what's happening.
Well, Scott, I've got another question. Have you seen Michael Moore's new film, Planet of the Humans?
Yep, watched it last week.
Yeah, it's really, you know, it just points out, again, there's no free lunch in any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I had seen something, this was 6 or 8 months ago, I think, but it was and it was somebody in the, you know, Chinese government, but they were talking about by 2035 that there would be 50 million solar panels a year that needed to be recycled.
Yeah. Yeah, no, look, there's clean, dirty, good, bad. Let's just kind of set that over there and talk about, let's set the fuels aside and talk about environmental impacts, okay? All forms of energy have some environmental impacts. The denser the energy, typically the better, because you get more bang for your buck. Nuclear has the least environmental impact, because I'm not talking about the nuclear waste just for a second, but just in terms of emissions and density, mining uranium and thorium, yes, but so much energy in that, and then the efficiency of the systems, always on, et cetera, just remarkable density. So, and then you start coming down through the food chain, you know, natural gas, oil or liquid hydrocarbons, coal, pretty dense, not as dense, and then hydro, once you fill up the dam, you can spin those turbines. Geothermal, pretty good for a while, depending, but, you know, not like dense, but you know, renewable and below the surface, and then you got to move, and then you get into the systems that capture solar and wind and waves and tides. So capturing the light or the motion. Again, those systems aren't renewable. There's nothing renewable about solar panels, wind turbines, or batteries. I think everybody on this call understands that. You got to mine all that stuff, and then you got to make it, and then you put it in landfill, and then you do it again because they wear out. So it's not renewable. There's nothing renewable. And just different kinds of impacts. So you start working through the math of all this, and I'm a huge fan of renewable energy, especially distributed renewable. The people in Gunchukwa, they're not going to get a nuclear reactor or a gas power plant. They're going to get distributed renewable energy. Pico Hydro, if they would let it happen in the river, but they won't because it's sacred water. So theirs was PV, solar, micro wind turbines, some bio, different kinds of bio, geothermal, small scale geothermal systems, just heat pump kind of stuff, all good. But you start marching through to the bigger, denser cities, and we're moving 150 million people a year to cities these days. Dense cities are good for a lot of things, environment. You're more efficient, but you need dense energy. You got to have a lot of energy to run a city, okay? And that's going to come from dense forms. So there's no free lunch. And the sooner we can, I call this the radical middle, energy, environment, the economy, that overlap space. Get in there and the data, and it's challenging, and you're not always right, and you got to compromise and work through these energy, environment, economy challenges, but in a way that has actual sustainable outcomes. So if we can get in there and do that at all our different ways, then we'll solve it. We're bright, and we will solve this. But sitting out here on the edge, throwing away 85% of the world's fuels, which isn't going to happen, but everybody votes for it, and then you go to 7 billion people in the world, and they're going, "We're not going to do that. We need energy," you know, and one atmosphere. Yeah, I just get lost in some of these conversations, to be candid with you. So,
Okay, so how about, I guess I've thought about this, but I haven't done much digging into it at all, but is there any progress being made on fusion, nuclear fusion, electric generation? I mean, I don't hear it. I'm not seeing it discussed at all, but like I said, I haven't really looked into it at all, Scott.
fusion, into nuclear fusion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for generating electricity.
Yeah, yes, it continues to be worked on. It's still a massive physics problem. You know, the quippy answer is it's just 30 years away and always will be. You know, but sure, and that could be a game changer. But let's talk about the game. Well, first of all, you know, fission isn't so bad either. Splitting things, we know how to constrain that reaction. All it does, all nuclear is a source of heat. Boil water, make steam, turn a turbine, run a generator. It's just, that's all it is. It's, instead of burning coal and natural gas, you're boiling water with radioactivity, okay? That reaction. So that's not a bad thing, from small modular reactors all the way up to the big ones. And we do that really quite well in the world. Fusion is a different problem. How do you constrain that reaction? How do you constrain not splitting, but fusing those things, and like the sun does? And people have worked on it, and I think there might be breakthroughs, but once it's done, are you ready to have a fusion reactor near you? You know, people won't even let fission reactors near them because they have these concerns that, if you really look at all the data, are very misplaced about the safety of nuclear. And so it would take decades to take a working fusion reactor and propagate it broadly enough to, no matter what you said and no matter how safe it was, to get it out there. So I don't look to it as a solution for climate change. We need something sooner than that. I do think that nuclear is a big part of the solution to emissions, atmospheric emissions. I've been asked to essentially host a big forum on nuclear, invitation only, at UNC in this fall. And a lot of academics, industry, and decision makers and NGOs are going to be there. All the players, some who hate it and some who love it, and then some in between. I don't know why they asked me to convene this thing, but they did. And so we're going to take a deep look. Aspen Institute is going to try to do something in part on nuclear this fall. So the conversations are taking shape. China is building 29 new reactors today and have 50 on the books. So again, here goes China. Needs energy, and they're going down all these paths. But I hope India does. India has 1.2 billion people, a third of the land area of the United States, three to four times the people. I hope they do some nuclear. You know, it's a densely populated, needs dense energy, no emissions, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't make sense all over the world. I visited New Zealand. I'm not going to put a nuclear reactor on the Ring of Fire. And I'm not convinced that Japan should either, to be candid with you. This is a tectonically active area. Tsunamis aren't unusual, earthquakes, et cetera. So, you know, nuclear works in some places geologically and not so much in others.
So we have a comment and a question from Christine. Her comment is, thank you for Butch for the question on nuclear. And the comment is so much fear about nuclear energy. But her question is one that I was also thinking of, is what one question would you ask of all candidates running for president?
Why don't you let some younger people run? God, you know? I don't know. With energy? Or just in general?
Well, let me ask a similar question in another way.
Yeah.
If you were anointed as the person that would decide on how the United States would get their energy, what would you decide?
Yeah. Well, let me answer it this way. The United States is a fairly large geographic area, complex economy, and complex cultural. We have states that have different political leanings. We have lots of different cultures, both in educational backgrounds and religious backgrounds, and we're a complicated economy. It's remarkable how well we run. There's no other place on earth that's like us, okay? None. You can pick a few cities that are very multicultural, London and Paris, but no other big economy like ours. Take a look at China. How diverse is that? You know, just go around the world and check it out. So it's an interesting ongoing experiment. The challenge with energy is energy comes from resources, whether they're fossil resources, and you have to capture those and collect them, or hydro resources, geothermal resources, or the sun and the wind, which you have to mine the stuff to collect those and do stuff with it. So everybody has different resources, and every state in the US, let's say regions in the US, have different resources. Putting up solar energy in Seattle makes about as much sense as putting up solar energy in Germany. You know, have you seen the solar intensity of Germany and Seattle? It's not very good. On the other hand, you know, wind in West Texas and up the wind corridor makes some sense. I'm not going to go do geothermal in the middle of the Craton necessarily, but the Gulf Coast, deep geothermal, or some active plate margins. So these resources matter. And I can't create an edict for the United States of America that says, this is our energy and you're going to do it, because it won't work. Okay. Some voting systems are more passionate for the sun and the wind, and appear to be tolerant of the collection systems on the environment. Michael Moore's film pointed some of that out. It wasn't his film, actually, he was just producer. And some of it was a little long in the tooth, and actually, whatever. And then he got into slamming people, and yeah, you know, McKibben and Al Gore and those guys, they can be kind of hypocrites sometimes, but who isn't? And then it goes to the dystopian, you know, people are the problem and profit is the problem. And I'm not in that camp. I'm sorry, I don't think humans are a problem. I think we're part of the earth and we're our solution. We have that intelligence. So let's get on about letting different parts of the country work towards. So how we do that? We set some goals. We say, hey, you know, maybe you can't do the atmospheric emissions reductions, but maybe you can do a lot better land use, nature, protect nature. So dense energy, not mining, not manufacturing, not landfill disposing. Maybe you can do that. Maybe you can do water. Maybe you can use the water wisely in this part of the country and provide electricity into a grid that would be very helpful. Maybe you have wonderful solar and wind resources and can use those to feed other systems. So set some atmospheric, local air, land and water targets, and nobody can satisfy all of them. But if you're hitting on some of those targets, then you're doing a pretty good job, you know, and still providing energy to underpin the economy, to let us invest in all these cleaner things. And that's kind of how I would take it on, is instead of shaming because you're not all about CO2 emissions, which is kind of where we are today. I think that really risks some big chunks of the environment that I'm passionate about myself. And I don't support that kind of shaming, especially if your solution is, well, we'll just get our energy from Texas, you know, and we'll get zero emissions. You know, nice job, but you're not helping the climate. And that's Governor Cuomo. I'm sorry, that's what he has just said by not building a natural gas pipeline to New York. Has said, we're going to get our stuff from other places. We'll be clean. You emit. And by the way, the price of electricity is going to go up. It will. And that's a regressive tax. Gasoline, electricity, we all pay the same for those. Subsidies for renewables. I ask students, how many of you have a Tesla? I'm asking students. They're like, I wish. Well, who has Teslas? The answer is rich people. Who pays for Teslas? And then they look around, we do. through subsidies. You know, so why are students subsidizing Tesla owners? That's called regressive. Everybody who pays taxes is subsidizing Tesla owners. I love Teslas. I've driven them in our films. But I really don't think people without much income should pay for it. Do you? Isn't that regressive? And so why is it that some people seem to be exuberant about these regressive costs on lower income people? I just don't get that. And so New York, I don't think you're helping the one atmosphere, and I really don't think you're helping the people of New York. And this is a state economy that is in deep straits right now, okay, for lots of reasons. And so I think it needs some more thought. Okay, Texas is in deep straits too. Get ready for this session. Wow, we meet our legislature rides into town to Austin 5 months every other year, thank God, and solves the state's problems. But it's going to be a different session with prices where they are and the royalties and the severance taxes and everything. It's going to be a very different legislative session. But Texas balances its budget every year somehow and does it. It's not easy.
So I'm going to confer with the other Butch Butler. We've taken up an hour and 9 minutes of your time. We have a question on the board that sounds like a perfect ending question. So if no others pop up, I'd like to say that this is the last one. And this is from Stephen, who said, what would you like people listening tonight to do?
Grab a beer and you mean not do tonight. You asked it correctly. I heard it wrong. Here's what I'd like to ask you to do. On the switchon.org website, and Sophie, I don't know if Sophie's on, but I'd like you all to go find another 50 people to screen switch on. Pick a group, a scout troop, a school, a church group, civic group, whatever, and facilitate them seeing this film, because otherwise most won't. And that would be a start. Open all of our eyes up a little bit to this challenge. The second thing I would like to have you think about doing is I make all of my PowerPoint slides, and I talk a lot, available to you as animated PowerPoints on the switchon.org website. And there are 20 packets by topic of these slides. I need to add some more in there with an MP4, what I would say under them. Grab those slides. They're yours. They take a lot of time to make them. They have references for the data. Make a little talk of your own. Shuffle them however you like. All I would ask is you try to be as honest as you can be about the subject and start to talk. Go to these groups, volunteer, and speak at a school. Speak at a Toastmasters group. Go talk to your local governments about the nuances here, the critical thinking. When we're talking about fracking offsets in Colorado, what does it really mean? And how has the United States of America reduced its CO2 emissions by 700 million metric tons since 2005? That was the base year the US set for Paris. We've reduced by 700 million metric tons. We will meet our Paris Accord targets this year in the power sector in the United States, 10 years early. How did we do that? We didn't even sign it. We've done more than any other country in the world to reduce CO2 emissions, actually reduce them. How do we do it? Natural gas replaced coal because it's cheap. State portfolio standard for renewables, efficiency. And then that little shell game of you make my stuff. That's not real. But how did we do it? So begin to educate people, because you're smart, intelligent humans. I know you are, because you're spending time with me. And go out and do that. And I can't do all this. And I'm going to ask you to engage that way. So share this film. That'll get people looking at our other stuff, and then grab my slides. I mean, that's what they're there for, and begin to think about, add your own whatever, and start to educate, because if you don't do this, others are. And I promise they have some pretty severe biases. They're not wrong necessarily, but just not complete. Okay. Some things are wrong. I mean, some of the documentary films you see just are wrong, but most aren't. They're trying to tell a story, but they don't show you the whole story. And so that's so important for our future. Get out there and tell the whole story. So that's what you can do.
Thank you. Will the real Butch Butler speak up?
There you go. Well, I just, Scott, want to thank you for being with us tonight. It's a lot of good, questions and good responses from you, as I knew it would be. And I think good words about what we can do to move forward. And it's something we all should think about. And, just to mine the website. It's an amazing resource. The Switch Energy Alliance resource. I'd encourage everybody to spend a little time, cruising through that and looking for these resources that Scott has mentioned, because there is an awful lot there.
One other quick thing, Butch. Some of the other things we're making in parallel in the time of COVID, we're about to finish a museum film. It's 4.5 minutes long, no dialogue. It's made for the Houston Museum of Natural Science and the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. So George has not seen it. We're about to test run it, but it's this Hollywood, literally Hollywood quality film where kids get off a bus on their phones, go into their house, grab a sandwich, glass of water, the remote, go to the TV, and they don't see it, but behind them, everything is disappearing, and then the house disappears, and now they're in their underwear in the dirt. And we had little actors, and their parents were there. It was PG, but it's okay. And then we start bringing it back by showing you the full supply chain to get wood, harvest wood, mill it, move it, lumber yard, build your home, and then the home builds, and clean water, and food, and electronics. And in 4.5 minutes, you have a pretty good understanding of what energy does in your life and what it would be like without it and how much we use. So that's going to be available. The AP Environmental Sciences stuff is going to be available. We're very close to both the platform and the curriculum for that 1 month of the year-long class. 200,000 kids a year take that. 6,000 teachers teach it every year. We're making a History of Energy series, a little short format, 8 videos with each kind, the history of coal, the history of gas, how did all this come about? And then another Energy in the World bit. So the website is just growing and rich in content. We're a 501c3. I haven't asked anybody for donations, and I'm not great at that. But if you're so inclined, I want to thank those who do that. It matters. And I particularly, some people send us $25, and I write them a thank you note. And we actually send a Switch signed DVD to anybody, because I know that $25 is as much as the big gifts we get from foundations and corporations and other things. It's pretty important. So I donate my time. Allie and I give our money to all this cause, but we're paying real people. And so your help there would be appreciated as well. So thanks.
And I'll make one more comment. The forum will be making a donation to Switch Energy Alliance, which I've mentioned to you, Scott. So just so everybody that's listening in knows, we will be doing that, and very pleased to be able to do that.
We appreciate it. Thank you, Butch.